Hi, I would like to introduce you into some key aspects of PANGAEA that are relevant in order to find and access data in PANGAEA in a structured manner. Our web page is the first and most obvious entry point to PANGAEA. It contains links to our data sets as well as to other useful resources. One very useful resource is the PANGAEA Wiki. The PANGAEA Wiki is actually the largest documentation resource of PANGAEA. It contains the submission guidelines, standard operation procedures, templates, but also many other information like you could read on how to prepare specific type of data for biology, for experiments, lab experiments, field experiments, chemistry, and so on. There's technical background, there's documentation on how PANGAEA is fair, interoperable, and so many, many more things can be found. Find the wiki, it's a bit hidden in under help. To submit data to PANGAEA, you click the Submit Data button in the upper left corner of the web page. Is submission form appears in which you can step by step add metadata to your data set, to the data set submitted. That will obviously also be submitted through and attached in the submission form. After the submission, a ticket in our issue tracker will be generated. The issue tracker is used for the PANGAEA editors in order to keep track of the many data submissions we get. We often get up to several hundreds at a time. They are also used for communication between data submitters and data curators, as well as for documentation, the organization of the data workflow, so you can keep track on the status of the data submission. Once a data submission is in process, data curators can access so-called editorial system that helps us transferring a data submission into the actual data set. It ensures that all relevant contextual data or metadata is accurately added to the data set. After the data ingest is complete, a dedicated landing page for the data set is created and is linked with a persistent identifier. I mentioned that a data submission starts by clicking Submit Data and then generating the submission form. In an ideal case, data submitters, here called users, first inform themselves about how to prepare data in our user wiki or get in touch with the help desk. Once the data is submitted, the editorial board sees the ticket, and then the data submission undergoes a first initial review. During this initial review, the data is, for example, checked for whether it belongs to fits to the scope of PANGAEA and whether all contextual data is complete and whether the data fulfills all formal requirements. Once the first data review has been taken place and the PANGAEA accepts the data submission for review, the dataset gets assigned to a data editor or data curator. The data editor makes a more in-depth review of the dataset and checks the review for the data quality and metadata quality. Editorial processing typically includes feedback cycles between the editor and the data user or data submitter, and aims at improving the quality of the data and enriching the data with metadata. One major effort of the curators is to standardize measurement variables and also assign metadata and measuring variables to the PANGAEA terminology catalog. Once this process is completed, the dataset is ready for publication. A DOI is requested at data site, and once the DOI is minted, the data publication is ready for use. The data set can then be accessed through different channels, through APIs, the website, and the data warehouse. You will learn much more about this during this workshop. But in order to find and access data, you need context information that makes the data findable, understandable, and in the end, also interoperable. I am therefore now talk about the PANGAEA data model. PANGAEA data model might sound a bit technical, but it's actually the key access to data. What is meant to access PANGAEA data? What is meant by PANGAEA data model is, in a way, the structure that outlines how the data is organized and related with the database and the metadata. The core of the data model is the data set. The data set can be described by a wide spectrum of details, the metadata. One important group of metadata is the bibliographical metadata, like the author and the affiliation. They are also part of the data set citation. Other components of the data citation are the publication year, the publication title, and the abstract describing the data sets and the techniques, the methodology applied. Metadata can be further described by other attributes like email address, website, and so on. The authors and affiliations can be made identifiable by adding persistent identifiers, such as the raw ID for affiliations and ORCID for the authors. The event is a central component of the PANGAEA data model. The event refers to the sampling event from which the investigated samplings that the database's sets are based on originate. So, for example, a station on a research cruise. Events are unique in terms of their metadata. They are made identifiable by time and location, as well as methodology and, if applicable, campaigns. Method and devices can be further described by sensor details and instrument details, such as model types or manufacturers. Campaigns can get further enhanced with metadata through adding stations, tracks, and platforms. And the part of the spatial and geographical metadata, of course, date, time, and coordinates. And on top of that, a third dimension geocode, like height or depth. The event can be made identified by adding the international generic sampling number, e.g. SN. A third group of metadata is funding-related metadata that include project information and grants and awards and the respective websites, and also funder IDs and grant IDs, if applicable. And then last but not least, the central component of the data model is the data itself. It is described by names of the measured variables. We also refer to measurement variables as parameters at PANGAEA, the measuring units and the methods. There's a reference list attached to almost each data set that can be used to cross-link to the respective paper publications and other relevant references used in that data set. And all there can be links to all kind of further documentation like standard operation procedures and many more. So overall, you see there's that our data model contains a large variety of metadata that will then eventually make it easier to find and refine and the data that you are interested in. On the dataset landing page, this looks like the following. In the upper part, like in the top of the dataset, the bibliographical information will appear as the citation with the authors, the title of the dataset, and the DOI. It also contains a link to the paper publication. In this example, you see an oceanographic dataset that is part of a collection, of a dataset collection, which is mentioned here. And then you see the abstract below the citation, keywords, and the reference list. If you scroll down on our landing page, you will find links to other versions of the dataset. In this case, it's a link to raw data, further details, funding information, this geospatial and temporal coverage, and the sampling information. The sampling information is the event that I mentioned, sampling event that I mentioned earlier. Below that, you find a list of all measured variables of that data set. And there's the option of documenting changes in the data set. So if any changes appear, they can be documented under change history. And PANGAEA publishes most of the data sets under the Creative Commons Attribution license. At the bottom of the web page, you can download the data and get a preview of the data. In order to get a preview, you have to click on the button View Dataset as HTML. In this data preview, you can get an impression of the dataset data table structure with the parameter names as abbreviated parameter names in the header and the numerical values below that. Before we get into our first break, I would like to mention one speciality about our datasets that is relevant for this workshop. We have we have several publication types at PANGAEA. Most of our datasets are single datasets that then can be supplements of a paper or vice versa, but some of our datasets are bundled to collections. We have homogeneous collections called publication, series, for example, time series, and heterogeneous data collections that compile data for specific purposes. The consequence of that is that if you access data by scripts especially, and you want to get the content of data sets, and you don't filter out these collection data sets, you might end up not getting numerical numbers as contents as you would expect, but rather get the contents of zip files, which can be data tables, binary files, and many more. And this will certainly lead to errors. So you should have that in mind starting to accessing data by scripts.